Hey guys, Stefan here. So, it's your first crypto bear market. And by crypto, I really mean Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the only game in town. Pretty much every other crypto just follows Bitcoin. So, here's some things that you should consider now that it seems that we're entering into a bit of a downtrend. Look at the way Bitcoin's price seems to follow a bit of a fractal pattern. So, simply just zoom out on that chart, and you'll see that we've been here before. We've been here many times before. And so it sort of goes through these cycles of ups and downs, and what typically happens is that the new price floor each time is much higher. And while you might see sort of media come out and say, oh look, it's ended because of this hack or this particular regulation or this, that and the other, but I think it's more appropriate to think of it like that's just a popular cause that's being attributed to the crash. And while that might be part of it, that's not really the fundamental reason why. Normally what we see is it's really more like it's an exhaustion of the possible participants who could have been reached in that stage. Because the people who are really early on have a very high degree of conviction about this, whether it's a new technology or whether it's Bitcoin. And so what happens over time is it's less and less of those really hardcore people with a strong conviction, and it becomes more and more of the sort of light speculator or the weak hand, let's say. So with Bitcoin, this game is all about being one of the strong hands. The people who are strong hands tend to do well in the long run. So that's basically part of it, that you've got to really zoom out on the chart. What happens is people will just rationalize themselves into doing whatever the herd is doing. So when it's on the way up, they'll think, oh no, I've missed the boat. And when it's on the way down, instead of thinking, oh wow, what a bargain, why don't I get more of this? They think, oh no, it's all over. So you've got to think, cost is what you pay, value is what you get. So the money in these things is really made by buying low and holding for the long run. And so basically and I'll put up some stats for you guys, but basically the people who bought and just had the stones to just hold, they did well. So you've got to step back and also consider, why did you buy into Bitcoin in the first place? If you bought into some of these altcoins and ICOs to sort of have a punt because you were maybe looking for the new Bitcoin and you were worried that you couldn't get a quick 10x or 20x or however much you were looking for, then I think you haven't really understood what's at play here and what's at stake here. Now, I think a small percentage of you guys will probably go on to read more about, okay, why is Bitcoin the hardest money ever? And in a sense, why it is the most scarce thing to exist other than your time. And if you sort of go and read the underlying economics behind it, that's some of the appreciation that you might come to. So just off the top of my head, a couple books and materials that I think help explain Bitcoin the best. I think the number one book that you should read is Safety Moose's The Bitcoin Standard. Have a look online. There's some talks by him. I've done one or two review videos and a blog post on that as well. Other really good books to read. So Murray Rothbard, What Has the Government Done to Our Money? Guido Hulsmann, The Ethics of Money Production. Really fantastic book. He's got an essay, Guido Hulsmann has an essay called Deflation and Liberty. That's also very well worth a read. Julian Simon, The Ultimate Resource. Mises, Human Action. Rothbard, Man, Economy and State. And Mises's book, The Theory of Money and Credit. So some of those are a little bit more longer and not as directly related, but they're all really good to give you an underlying fundamental understanding of economics and the monetary economics particularly, which is the most important thing to think about with some of this stuff. So as to how long the Bitcoin bear market could last, I mean, for all I know, this could just be a shakeout and then we're just going to hit some crazy breakout in the next week. But I'm treating it as though we're entering into a bit more of a downtrend, and it could be a few months, it could be 6 months, and then maybe we have a rally at the end of the year, or it could be a couple years. It could be we wait until the next halving, and then a few months after that, that's typically when the next kind of bull cycle starts. And so if you're working on that timeline, it could be maybe 2.5 years. Who knows? But ultimately, you've got to really play the long game here and sort of compare Bitcoin against what are the other potential things that you could be buying. And also, what are the things that are most scarce and most likely to maintain a good stock to flow ratio, which is, in our view, the Bitcoin maximalist view of what makes a better store of your value. So what's going to happen next? Well, what's going to happen is there's a lot of infrastructure build out that's going to happen across the Bitcoin economy, let's say. So a couple examples. Bitcoin has got all these great innovations coming out. I mean, recently we had Better Hash, which was a new way of helping to decentralize mining pools. And there are various other improvements that have been mentioned earlier. So some examples there would be signature aggregation, such as Schnorr signatures or Musig. You got Mast, you got Mimblewimble, you got Taproot and Graftroot. There's just so many more. And not just at the Bitcoin level, but we've also got improvements coming on layer 2, such as Lightning Network. So you've got things like the concept of channel factories, or L2, or atomic multipath payment, or cross-chain atomic swaps. We've got just more general build out of the architecture. So more and more merchants and services who are taking Lightning Network payment. There are already some, and there are many more to come. But ultimately, you've got to keep your eye on the monetary price. So consider Bitcoin's inflation rate right now is around 4%. So it's sort of roughly comparable to most fiat monies. But once we hit the next Bitcoin halving, which is in about 2 years, so approximately May 2020, the reward rate of Bitcoin, as in the amount of new Bitcoins being generated every 10 minutes on average by a block, will halve. What does that do? Well, it means the new stock coming in every 10 minutes is halved. So that basically means the inflation rate will dramatically drop. So it'll basically be a little bit under 2% from that point. And every year after that, it will get less and less and less. Which means if you are able to delay sort of your consumption in the here and now and push that out into the future, Bitcoin will be more scarce than any other sort of liquid kind of asset that you could trade with. And that's part of the case for Bitcoin. So obviously not saying people just go out and throw your life savings into it, but it's more like think about what sort of asset allocation you want, and how much money you want to put in at times when it's actually historically quite a good ratio to buy in terms of its price measured as a sort of over its long-term average. And one way of looking at that is at the Mayer multiple, which I'll put a link to as well. So what could you do in the meantime? I would suggest learn the real history behind Bitcoin. So look at some of the monetary history and the economics as told by the Austrian economists. And you can look at the history around privacy and sovereignty as told and explained by the cypherpunks. The battle on, GPG and how they've been working to try and make it possible for people to have some level of privacy on the internet. You could learn how to run your own full node and keep your Bitcoin private keys secure and backed up, make sure they're accessible to your family if something were to happen to you. And so ultimately you can continue accumulating a position in Bitcoin. As I mentioned earlier, cost is what you pay, but value is what you get. So it's a very funny thing that when, say, the big stock market crash happened in the 2000, the GFC, the 2008 crash, those people who sort of were running away from the stock market, paradoxically, that was actually the best time to be buying more, because there was a big resurgence rally the next year in 2009. Now, granted, not everyone kept their jobs, right? So so long as you're able to keep income coming in, that's often the best time to accumulate more of these sorts of assets like stocks or bonds or whatever during those times that it's cheap. And so in some ways, even in the world of stocks, investors will look at things like the CAPE ratio, cyclically adjusted price earnings ratio, and try to understand, okay, is it low or is it high? Is it a good time to buy based on that? And I think within the Bitcoin world, the Mayer multiple is sort of like the equivalent of the CAPE. So when the Mayer multiple is low, that's like a good time. Like historically, that has been a good time to buy. So lastly, I'll just leave you with this comment here that basically Bitcoin flows from weak hands to strong hands. So the weak hands tend to get shaken out easily. They tend to sell their coins, and they tend to do the opposite of good investing, which is to buy high and then sell low. So good investing is the other way around. It's buying low, selling high. So just keep that in mind, guys. Bitcoin flows from weak hands to strong hands. So if you go and do some reading, you can maybe improve the way you think about it and become more like a strong hand yourself. Thanks, guys. See you on the next one.